Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Tell It Like It Is podcast. I'm your host, Alexi Bailey, and I have a very special guest today, Taylor Ray.
Hi,
Hey, Taylor, how are you?
I'm doing well. It is a surprisingly beautiful day in Seattle. We get more of them than people think we do, but it's good. How are things over where you are?
New Jersey. It's almost bedtime. It's 9:30 at night. It's getting to be spring here, so it's like 60, 65. It feels like an early spring this year.
That sounds great. Yeah, we usually get a couple fake springs in Seattle, but it was pretty nice today.
Yeah. So Taylor, I saw you sharing a bit of your journey on Instagram, and I reached out to you. Um, you're a trans woman, and I wanted to just give people a chance to hear your story and learn a little bit more about the movement, your story, the culture, and just anything that, we don't usually get to talk about.
Yeah, so I guess my journey starts where I was born. So I was born and raised in Springfield, Oregon, which is right next to, it's about 2 hours south of Portland. And so it's a college town. It's majority white, pretty working class. I was raised Mormon, actually. Both my parents are immigrants. They both were born in the Philippines, but met in Oregon. And yeah, I was raised in Oregon, played sports my entire life. I was a competitive swimmer growing up, and I played tennis. And just like you hear this a lot, but I knew I was different from a very young age. Like, I think that it's kind of a common theme with people in the LGBT plus community. I just didn't know what it was, right? And so I was born in 1991, and so there's so much more representation these days, and so I didn't really have that exposure. And I was also, I was raised pretty conservative. My mom was Mormon, and so that's how I was raised. And so I didn't really have access to anything that wasn't cisgender or heterosexual. And so I probably knew that so I was assigned male at birth. When I was in sixth grade, I had this crush on this boy on my basketball team. And I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to, I don't think I'm supposed to be doing this. And so there's a lot of guilt and because I didn't really know what to do. And I've always been pretty effeminate. Like, I feel like a lot of my relatives are like, we know. But I was super into sports as well. And so that kind of gave me a cover, I guess, for a really long time. And I kind of kept it suppressed for a while. I think the first person I told that I was queer was one of my cousins the summer before freshman year of high school. And I remember saying it out loud, and it was just so weird to me because I never thought I could ever admit it and have closure with it and because back then I didn't know that was possible to live as back then a gay man. I didn't realize that what kind of lifestyle that would be. I didn't have any gay relatives. There was no gay people on social media, and it was just, all I knew was my family and my community, and there really wasn't any queerness or any gay people. And so it was hard. It was really, really hard. And I think that there was a lot of guilt around it because I knew that I really wanted to go to heaven, and I really wanted to please my parents. And, my parents were kind of the stereotypical immigrant parents that were just very you need to be traditional American, but also Filipino. And you need to, have these values that they want. And, they didn't know any better. And I don't ever fault them for anything that they did and how they raised me. I know that they did the very best that they could with what they knew. And so it wasn't easy. I came out finally to my friends and family when I was in high school, my freshman and sophomore year. My mom she took it great. She was like, yeah, I'd totally support you. And I actually was too afraid to tell my dad. So my dad has always been one of my heroes. So my name before, I thought some people don't talk about their dead name or their old name. So my dead name was Irvin, and I'm actually super proud of that because my dad's favorite basketball player when he immigrated to the United States was Irvin Magic Johnson. And so I was his firstborn, and so I got named Irvin after him. And so I was just always going to be, that stereotypical like firstborn, the son, like I'm going to carry on the family tradition. I'm going to carry on the family name. I'm going to have kids. I'm going to have a wife. I'm going to have, all these things that they expect. And I think it really, really kind of affected him to know that that wasn't necessarily going to be the case. And also, I also think it was partially like all you really know at that age and at that point of society is violence against queer people and how hard their life is. And so I know that that was probably part of why it was so hard for my parents sometimes, is they knew that my life was definitely going to be harder than if I would have been straight. And so we just really, really talk about it. We kind of had like a don't ask, don't tell policy with my dad. And so I just didn't really, I tried not to bring boys around. I tried not to like act too flamboyant around him. And so we kind of just made it work all through high school. It was a lot of pressure. I was, like I said, I was the firstborn. And so I was supposed to get a full ride scholarship and I was supposed to go to college and get a really good job. And because I was queer and really, really feminine, I felt like I needed to make up for it. And so I literally did every single extracurricular during high school. Like I had like a 3.8 GPA. I was captain of captain of tennis and swimming. I was a manager of the volleyball team. I was in 2 choirs, I was in 2 bands. And because I didn't know what else to do. Like I was struggling so much with who I was supposed to be because I didn't know. I didn't really belong. There were a lot of gay people at my high school. I felt like I was too brown for the white kids, but I wasn't brown enough for the brown kids. I didn't speak Tagalog. I still don't. And so I was just lost in all these intersections. And I didn't like myself. Like I didn't know who I was, but I was like, all I wanted to be growing up when I was in high school was like, I wish I was white. Like I wish I was straight. I wish I was all these things. I don't wish those things anymore because of the journey that I've been on of just unpacking everything. But I remember distinctly like growing up and just wanting to just be the same. I didn't want to be different. I just wanted to blend in with everyone. But there was some gender stuff in there too. I think, when I was little, I was like the stereotypical, like would play in my mom's clothes and like loved her makeup. But it was hard enough for me to come out as gay that there was no way that I didn't even know what trans was, honestly. Like I had, like I said, I had no exposure to it. And so I made it through high school and a lot of stuff at home was tough, but we made it through. I graduated high school and eventually I left home a few years later and I moved to Seattle. Where
college?
I went to college at University of Washington.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was a whole wild ride. I like took a bunch of credits in high school and then transferred to University of Oregon. And then I went to Seattle Pacific University. And then I eventually graduated from University of Washington in 2018. So I like to make it hard on myself. I like to take the long way. I like to take the scenic route with everything that I do.
Okay.
But Seattle is great. I mean, I moved here in 2012, so almost 10 years ago next month. And I thought that was it. I was like, oh, like I'm going to a big city. There's gonna be like a gay community. Like I'm gonna be a part of something. I can finally know who I am supposed to be. But then what people don't realize, especially if they're outside of the queer community, is that the things in society also permeate the LGBTQ plus community. So there's still a lot of like misogyny. There's still a lot of racism within, the LGBT community. And so I figured, okay, cool. It's gonna be a bunch of gay people. Everything's gonna be fine. I'm just gonna be one of the people. And I realized that like, that was not the case. Like I was on dating apps and all these things. And it was like, like people were only into white guys and like really masculine guys. And I was like, I've been fighting my entire life to find who I am and find a place of belonging. And I still didn't have it. And it was really, really tough those first few years. And I kind of got lost in trying to be what everyone else wanted me to be and what I was supposed to be and what would be accepted and what would be found attractive in the community. And so along with that, I also found drag. And I think that was the thing that kind of opened my eyes to kind of gender things. And also, it was my way of that was my way in. I remember going to the gay club for the first time and seeing these performers, and like everyone loved them, and everyone would like, they were so confident and beautiful, and they would just talk to people, and like I was like, I want to be that person. Like I want to be confident, like I want to be that larger than life person. Like I want to be able to hide all my insecurities and kind of play pretend, and be able to be confident and be admired and want people to talk to me. And so drag was an amazing thing, that kind of opened my eyes and let me, meet a lot of people, a lot of, people of color, a lot of trans people of color. And it was my first kind of step into exploring my gender and what gender meant to me. And so I did drag. I still do drag every once in a while, but not as much. But I was Miss Gay Washington in 2015. I was Miss Seattle Pride in 2013.
Say that again.
Oh, I was Miss Gay Washington in 2015. And then in 2013, I was Miss Seattle Pride. So those were just a couple of pageants that I participated in drag, just to get myself out there.
Yeah. I mean, do you have someone help you get in, or do you just like figure it out on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So there's this like concept of like drag families and houses in the gay community, because it's like a lot of us. I was very, very lucky. My dad and I didn't get along when I was at home, but like I didn't get kicked out. I didn't get like, there was some tension by, so many queer people get kicked out of their home or get like completely cut off for their families. And so they need chosen family. They need people who are in their community. They need to create that family atmosphere for themselves. And so that's what it's like in drag. And I'm a volleyball player as well. And one of my very good friends did drag. And I was like, will you take me under your wing? Like, will you teach me how to perform and what it takes to be a performer? And yeah, I just went from there and kind of learned my way. There's old pictures of me out there. And it's like, I thought that I was so good and so pretty. And I look at these old pictures, I was like, girl, that was not it. But
so drag is more than dressing up and makeup.
Right. It is. There's so many different categories, I guess, of drag. There's so many different like ways, because it's an art form, and so everyone does art differently, right? There's drag kings, there's drag queens, there's like gothy drag, there's queens that sing live, there's queens that dance. There's so many different aesthetics. Even in the last like 10 plus years, like drag has developed into this huge thing where like everyone's welcome. And that was kind of the point of drag, was to get away from real life and be able to create this fantasy world where everyone is equal and everyone is beautiful and everyone is loved and everyone has a place. And that's what really, really resonated with me, and how I got to meet a lot of my like chosen family and friends that I still talk to today. So
drag is a man dressing up in women's clothes.
Yeah, so drag, and it could also be, a woman dressing up in like higher feminine, like there's, people who are assigned female at birth who are also drag queens. It's just like the art of, it's just the transformation, because there's also drag kings, which are people who are assigned female at birth, who dress up as men, and they kind of perform. It's like the complete, the opposite, kind of aesthetic, I guess.
Got it.
But it's always developing, it's always changing. That's kind of the exciting thing about drag, is that there's always people pushing the limits, and there's no rules anymore. I even feel like when I started, there was like, it was mainly just drag queens. You couldn't be a woman do drag. You couldn't be a trans woman do drag. Like you had to be born male and assigned male at birth and identify as a male. And that was like the only way to do drag. And now people are opening up and realizing that it's so much more than gender and the illusion. It really is just whatever fantasy that you want to create, whatever world that you want to live in, that you want to make for yourself, you do it. And that's kind of what drag is, just creating your own world where you can have your beauty be the center of it.
How did you do in college sports?
Yeah, so I actually played on the men's club volleyball team at University of Washington. I played there for a year. I was supposed to play for 2. I broke my leg my first year of playing there.
Ouch.
Yeah, I was older on the team. It was mostly like early 20s kids. And by the time I graduated in 2018, so I was in my mid-20s. So I was kind of like a parent on the team, but I loved it. I mean, at that point, I've already been coaching and I've already been doing so much stuff. And I was like, these kids are super young, super athletic, but it's like, what else can I bring to the table? And it was like my volleyball IQ, and it was just my leadership, and just being an out queer person, like exposing these kids to like a different point of view and a different way of life was really, really cool. And being able to find common ground and just like do what we all love to do. And it was really fun. It was an experience that I'm really, really glad I got to do. I didn't know if I was going to be able to have the opportunity to play any sort of sports in college. But it was really cool to get to represent a college and get to have that experience, as far as, you know, having that logo, you know, on your back and being able to have a team that has your back. And so it was really, really cool. I actually went to one of our last volleyball practices. I went in drag. We had the University of Washington drag competition, and I was judging it, and I also had to practice right after. And so instead of getting out of drag, I just showed up in drag, and everyone loved it. Like the coach was like, "This is great. Like, whatever. Like, go warm up." Like it was like no one thought of it any differently. Like everyone was like, "Yeah, that's
You got to be yourself."
Right. I've been very lucky in even being gay in high school and all my sports teams and in college as well. Before I transitioned, everyone was really, really accepting. And I don't ever take that for granted, because I know that's not always the case. But yeah, shout out to my old teammates. They all were fantastic teammates to me.
A big part of, for me, the whole movement that I think is very relevant is this idea of inclusion, right? We talk about diversity and inclusion, and a lot of people we're not there yet, you know. And
Right.
even things like violence against the LGBT community, like these things, people, it's kind of like we don't talk about it enough.
Right.
It's a real thing that you really have to be concerned about.
Yeah, it's there's so many intersections, right? Because like for me, I've always kind of had my radar up, because it's like there are certain towns where I would drive through, even Eastern Oregon or Eastern Washington, where I'm like, I will not stop here because I am brown, and that's not a risk I'm willing to take, right? And it's the same thing as like a queer person, and like, you know, it's like we go through those same things, and it's like we're in this kind of weird time where people almost feel like that doesn't exist anymore. Like, and maybe it's because people live in certain like liberal pockets, or they're more, you know, progressive, but it's like it's still a very, very real, you know, very real threat and a very real thing. It's the same thing as racism. Like everyone thinks that as soon as Barack Obama got elected, like there's no more racism. And that's kind of the dangerous thing, is that people think that, you know, racism isn't a problem, or homophobia isn't a problem, or transphobia isn't a problem, but there's still so much more movement and so much more to be accomplished, and so many more discussions to be had about inclusion, and about making sure that we are, you know, protecting our, you know, our fellow people. Like it's and a lot of it has to do with visibility and representation, and having that humanistic side of, you know, someone that lives in the deep South might not have ever met a trans person, or, you know, someone who, you know, has never met a Filipino person. Like, you know, there's all these things that people judge on and people make assumptions about without ever actually getting to know them, or knowing someone. And so it's really important. Like that visibility and representation is important to me, because I know that like with what I'm doing on Instagram and what I'm doing on TikTok is like, I really want to be that person that I needed when I was younger. Like, I want to be that person that like, I'm telling my story because I know there are other people like me who are the same age as me, or even older than me, or kids. Like there are people who need to hear that they're not alone, and that, you know, that they're valid, and that, you know, it is possible to be, you know, a trans woman of color and live a happy life and be successful. Because a lot of times that's not the case. Like you don't see that, you don't realize that that's a possibility for you. And that's kind of been my biggest motivation. I knew I came out as trans 2 years ago this summer, and when I was like, I wasn't sure if I was going to go on hormones. I wasn't sure what route I was going to take. I wasn't sure if I was just non-binary, if I was going to fully transition, quote unquote. I didn't really know, and there wasn't a lot of resources, because at first I was like, maybe I'll just take like a small dose of hormones and see what that does, but there wasn't a lot of resources out there for me, and I was kind of discouraged, and I was like, I feel so alone. And so many of my, my chosen family, my friends were like, you have to be that person, and like if you have it in you, like you can forge your own path, and others will follow you. And I know I'm not the first person to go on my journey, but I know that it's still really, really important for anyone who has the emotional capital and who can tell their story and kind of protect their self while doing it. And I have to check myself every now and then too. It's just like, you share so much and you forget to take care of yourself. But it's a privilege to do what I do. It's a privilege to share my story, and it's a privilege to be able to say that I've made it and I'm happy and I'm successful, because it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always, there was no manual for transitioning or for existing. So it was like, I really wanted to share my story and be able to be visible as much as possible. And so that's what's been kind of what I've been doing. Even at work, I transitioned at work. Like I transitioned in front of all my coworkers. Like they knew me before, during, and after my transition. And like, I work in real estate. I'm a managing broker. And so being able to represent at that level, be leading a team of real estate agents, and having that visibility, like I said before, of just being like, most of those people probably would have never met a trans person, but now all of a sudden they know me, and they know, what's important to me, and they know that I'm just a human, that I'm just trying to do all the things that they're trying to do. And
so I know you've done some surgeries.
mm-hmm.
Right? So what surgeries have you done?
Yeah, so that was another thing when I first started. I wasn't sure, like, do I do surgeries? Do I need surgeries? Trans people, to be trans, you don't need hormones, you don't need surgeries. Everyone has their own kind of journey. I always say the Rainbow Road has many destinations, and there's no right or wrong way. So eventually I did decide that I wanted to have surgeries. I had facial feminization surgery. So this one was a doozy. I had my hairline moved down, I had my brow bone shaved, I had my nose narrowed a little bit, I had my jaw shaved down, my chin shaved down, my trachea shaved, and I think that's it. It was a brutal surgery. It was like 9 hours long, and I woke up and I was like, who even is that? And like during my recovery, there were some parts where I was like, what did I do to myself? Like, am I going to even look the same? Like, and that was I wanted to look the same, just a little bit softer. I did have a breast augmentation. That was actually my first surgery that I did. I'd had a breast augmentation last summer, and then most recently I had a fat transfer. So I had all the fat taken out of my midsection and then put into my hips and my bottom to kind of feminize my body. I did all 3 of those surgeries within 6 months. Would I recommend doing it? It was rough. I'm not gonna lie. Like it was really rough especially since I'm an athlete. It was rough to not be able to be active and just be like basically in constant pain and healing. Like it's pretty traumatic for the body. It's the same thing when I started transitioning. Like I finally had that aha moment of like, oh, I do want to do this. And once I decide on something, I'm like, I want to do it now. Like I want to just get it over with. I want to move on with my life. And yeah, I don't think, I think I'm done with surgeries. I get, the question about bottom surgery a lot, or any other kind of surgeries that people get. And at this point, I'm kind of done. I'm also just kind of like, I want to use my PTO for vacation and not for recovery. But I think that's a common misconception too, is a lot of people assume that, like all trans people want to have bottom surgery, or that's kind of the goal of everyone. That's like, you're not transitioned until you have that surgery. And that's almost like a minority within a minority, right? Of just like, I don't, the genitalia that I was born with doesn't necessarily give me any sort of dysphoria. And a lot of the work that I had to do before I had these surgeries, I need to really make sure, and I had the help of a therapist, highly recommend therapy, was I really had to get out of the mindset of, having a defined jawline or having a defined brow bone makes you masculine or any of those things. I had to really, really like unpack everything and like refocus myself and be like, everything that I have is feminine as a woman because I'm a woman. So, my nose, my cheeks, my jaw, it's all womanly because I'm a woman. Like everyone comes in all different
What
shapes.
does that mean? Like, I am a woman. Like, what? I know you felt different. So how do you define that?
Yeah, I think that at first it was just like feeling uncomfortable in my body, which not all trans people do. Some people are just fine in their body. They just feel it spiritually, and they feel it like in how they're viewed. A lot of it is how you're viewed by society. And I think that for me, I was so unhappy for so long, and I couldn't understand why. Like I actually was really overweight in high school. I lost 80 pounds after I graduated high school. I got in shape. I got really, really built, and I was conventionally attractive. I look back at my pictures, I was like, I would date me. But it still wasn't enough. It's still, for some reason, what I was looking, who I was staring at in the mirror, it just wasn't right. Something wasn't there. And I remember this is mid-pandemic, we're on like a Taco Tuesday Zoom call because that's what my friends and I did just to have some sort of normalcy.
Action.
And we would have themes every week, right? Like it would be like, I don't know, like sweats or pajamas, or it'd be a certain kind of food. And that week was like, everyone's going to wear a wig. Everyone's going to wear some sort of like Party City tacky wig, just make it fun, make it whatever. And I remember, and I've been doing drag for at this point almost 10 years. And for some reason that day I put on this wig, we're all hanging out, and I like looked at the computer and I saw myself with this wig on, and I was like, oh, like this is it. Like this is the reason why I've been so unhappy. This is what I need to explore. And so it really was just knowing that I wasn't a man. And at first I was like, maybe I'm non-binary, like maybe, because I'd always been feminine and I did drag. So I was like, maybe I'm, somewhere in between. And I do think gender is fluid. I think that I identify as a non-binary trans woman, which is a lot to say, but I just basically, I know I'm a woman, but I also don't subscribe to society's point of view of what makes you a woman. I don't think having certain genitalia makes you a woman. I don't think the ability to bear children makes you a woman. I don't think having a high-pitched voice makes you a woman. I don't think long hair makes you a woman. Do I value some of those things in myself? Absolutely. But I don't think that being a woman needs to be defined as a whole. It really is, what makes me a woman might not make someone else feel like a woman, right? So there are plenty of women who hate long hair and don't like wearing makeup. But for me, that's what makes me feel more in touch with myself. And so it was a really personal journey, because I feel like, and that's kind of been the theme of my whole life, is I didn't know what I was doing. And so I just kind of adapted what other people and what society said I should look like or should act like. And so I thought that my transition had to be a certain way, and that I didn't change my name for a really long time. Actually, I used Irvin for a really long time. And I finally decided to change it just because I felt like it wasn't matching anymore. Like I didn't feel that sort of attachment. My middle name is actually my dad's, the first three letters of my dad's name is R-E-Y. So that's why I named myself after him, to kind of keep that dedication to him with my name.
So you stopped using Irvin before your surgeries?
Yeah, I stopped using Irvin. Wow, it was actually it was my birthday. My 30th birthday last year. I just was like, it felt right. And I think I debated with myself for such a long time. And I think I held on to it for so long because my dad gave me that name, and my dad died suddenly in 2020. So he never actually got to meet me. He never got to see me transition. And so it was really, really important that I kept a part of him with me. And so I've always liked the name Taylor, because I feel like it's not gender necessarily. Like there are, boys and girls and non-binary people who are named Taylor. And so I liked having that, like, I guess that mystery, like when I pick up the phone or you're addressing me, you're like,
Right.
he, she. I'm like, I was like, that makes sense for me, because I'm like, I want people to think outside of how they assume someone's gender, right? I want them to think outside of, oh, if they're named this, then they must be this gender, or they sound like this on the phone, so this gender. And then I chose Ray because it sounds cute and I wanted to honor my dad.
Listen, so I'm all about it. I'm all about people living the life they want to live and feeling how they want to feel. And at the end of the day, it's nobody's business.
Right.
You do what you want to do because you only get to live in your body once. If I consider myself and if I want to change my hair or I want people to call me, I think it's totally fine. Why do you think everyone's making such a big deal about it?
I think it's the unknown. I think it's just it's hard for people to understand what they don't know. And it's really hard for people to unpack things that don't directly affect them. So it's hard for people to, who have never met even like a queer person, let alone a trans person, understand my point of view and understand what I'm going through. It's hard for them, and I get that, and it's.
When was your first time dating?
Dating, like in general?
General, yeah.
Yeah, my first boyfriend was like serious boyfriend. I was like 19, I think. We dated for like a year or so.
Did you ever think about women or girls at all?
Yeah, so I actually like full circle, like a couple of years ago, I came out as bi, and then I came out as gay, and then this was 2019. I finally kind of realized, and I've been doing all this work of unpacking things, and I was like, I'm not really attracted to specific gender. Like, I'm just like, I got to the point where I was like, if I find someone attractive, I find them attractive. I'm into their soul. If I vibe with them, if I feel like, we're kindred spirits, like it doesn't matter what they look like or, what gender they are or what they describe as. And so I came out as pansexual, as far in that, to me, that means, I can find love and romance regardless of gender. It's like someone's spirit that I really in love with. And that was really, really eye-opening for me. And I think that was kind of part of my journey to where I could accept myself and my gender, because I felt like I was so rigid in my view of gender and sexuality before, because that's kind of what was expected of me. I mean, in high school, when I was out, like I was not a great person. I mean, who is in high school? I didn't know who I was, but like I was that like toxic masculine person where I was like, I'm gay, but I'm not like gay. Like I was very that, like, I didn't like feminine men, and I thought it just was like, because that's what society told me to value. If I was going to be gay, then I needed to like at least like masculine men or value masculinity, because whether people can admit it or not, like our society is male dominated, it's male centric, and we value men, we value, there's the pay gap and just like all those things. And so it took me a long time to get that out of my system and to be like, hey, like, what do I actually want? Not what people have told me to want or what I see on TV, like what makes me happy. And so that whole kind of couple of years, 2019 is it 2021, were kind of my years where I finally took the time to heal and unpack and figure out what I wanted in a partner, and also like what I wanted in myself.
I think that as human beings, we're programmed, right?
Right.
Society gives us a lot of messages from even before we can talk.
Mm-hmm.
Your parent takes away the pink and gives you the blue.
Exactly.
Like we're so heavily programmed that at some point it's hard to tease out when this began and when you got this particular message, and all the messages are so layered in and packed in, whether it's a movie or your teachers, your religion, like we're so programmed. At some point, the things you're saying and the things you're doing it without having original thought.
Right. There's so many different things that you don't even think about every day that are gendered, or that you think or you assume. No. And part of that is a survival thing. Like, I think as humans, like as animals, sometimes like and that's the whole thing about why there's so much controversy about it and why people don't understand, is that from a very, very young age, if something's not familiar to us, we're taught that that's dangerous. And that's like, we need to, it's them and us, and it's not, there's differences, and it's not necessarily celebrated. And and you're totally right. It's from a very, very young age, and it's so subliminal and advertising and in social media and all the things that we talk about, like even like stereotype casting in movies and stuff like that. You realize all the things that we value and perpetuate, and it's hard to unpack those. I understand. I'm doing the same thing every single day. I'm trying to work on myself and realize why I think the way that I think, and trying to put in that effort. And it's not easy. And I think that for a lot of people, it's discouraging. I know for me, if I'm not good at something right away, I tend to quit it. Like if I'm not good at a sport, I'm like, I'm out. Like I'm not going to do this. So I know that for some people, it's hard to get used to like pronoun usage and just all these things that you're not used to in everyday language, and like not gendering things, and not being like, I say you guys all the time, every day. And I'm trying so hard to be like, why is guys the default? Like, why is it always you guys? Like that, everyone just assumed like that's just a group of people's guys, right? Yeah. It's those little things that you don't even think about that permeate, our society. It's like, it's hard to unlearn those things.
So Leah Thomas.
Yeah, let's talk about her.
So can you tell the audience a little bit about who she is first?
Yeah, so Leah Thomas is a swimmer at Yale University. She competed on the men's team for, I believe, her first 3 years of college. She transitioned. She went on HRT. She followed the NCAA protocol. I believe at the time she was in college, it was 1 year of hormone replacement therapy before you can compete in your transition gender. I think that might have changed. I think it might be 3 years now, but when she was in college and when she transitioned, it was only 1. And so she just competed in the NCAA championships, which was this past weekend, actually. She competed in the 500 free, 200 free, and the 100 free. Yes, I think that's true. Someone will fact check me, but I think those are the events she swam in. And so she won the 500 free. She won by just under 2 seconds. She got 5th in the 200 free, which I think she was seated 3rd or something. She was seated above 5th and finished 5th. And then in the 100, she finished 8th, which is, you'll say that it's last, but there's so many different heats, and that's the final. So she was top 8 in the country. She wasn't, she finished 8th in that event. And so there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of rhetoric going on, and not all of it is great. A lot of it is misinformed, but I'm glad that the conversations are at least happening. I'm glad that there's an opportunity for people to learn and for people who want to learn. And I think that that's what it is in the age of the internet, you're going to find what you want to find. And if you want to educate yourself, you can educate yourself. But if you want to find evidence to prove this, that, or the other, then you can also find that. And I get that's uncomfortable for people to go against their upbringing or what they think and what is kind of this default science, right? And so there's this huge controversy about, she's taller, she's got, denser bones, she's got, bigger lung capacity than the swimmers who are assigned female at birth. And there's things that, she actually had to go through HRT, and she followed the book. And that's actually been the rule for a lot of other organizations. I know USA Volleyball is the same thing. I think it's 1 year before you can transition.
So based on the rules, she should be able to compete.
Correct. Yeah. So she followed the rules.
What do you think about people who are saying the rule doesn't make sense or it's not fair?
So they did change it. So I'll give you that. And I think that they're trying to make it quote unquote more fair. I think that there's there's still science to be released. I agree that, if you're going to transition and compete in sports, that, hormone replacement therapy should be required.
Because
That what was that?
should be required because hormone replacement therapy should be required because
In order to transition and compete in a sport, I think it makes sense. But so in HRT, when you do it for a year, which is what the original rule was, after a year, your body's completely different. And I know that anecdotally, like I can say that like I could tell the difference even after a few months of being on HRT, but after a year, my body makeup was completely different. I lost a ton of muscle. My endurance wasn't there anymore. I had a lot more fat and a lot more fat in different places. And so we really don't realize is not only does our body change, but it's like it changes our mechanics. I know me as a volleyball player, the way I jump and the way I hit is completely different than it was before because my body can't do what it did before. And so, and there's also a lot more things that go into sports. There's, you could have two people who are 6'5" and one of them is great at basketball and the other one sucks. Like there's so many different intangibles that I think people forget that go into sports.
So I'm struggling because I think, I'm a marathoner, right? And the men's marathon record is like 15 minutes faster than the women's marathon record.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is, okay, you were a man and now you've transitioned into a woman, but the idea is you shouldn't be able to compete in women's sports because that's not fair for women, regardless or not if you've done hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, I think what the argument with that is that there are cis women who have advantages over cis men. Like the range of abilities and the range of characteristics, even within cis women, is also varied. Like I'm not going to go up against Brittany Griner in the WNBA and dominate her because she has genetic advantages over me, but she was assigned female at birth. Is that fair that I'm competing against her? Like, yeah, like we're both women. And so it's like, it kind of overlooks the fact that there's such a wide variety of characteristics even within cis women. And even if you looked at hormones alone, you'll actually find that a lot of elite athletes on the women's side actually have higher levels of testosterone just because of how much muscle mass they have and how much they train. And so it's not as cut and dry and black and white as I think people make it out to be. And you'll actually see there's all these memes going around about Leah Thomas and being like the 462nd ranked male swimmer, and now she's number one. But that's actually not true. Like they actually just pulled that number out of nowhere. It was like from a random meet. And you actually see that she actually was an elite swimmer before she transitioned. Like she was in the top 10 in her categories before she transitioned. And also like when you develop as an athlete,
that's the fear, right? Someone, the 10th, a man who's ranked number 10, if he wants to let's say he's ranked number 10, he would never be on the Olympic team. Now he transitions and now he's on the Olympic team, right? And in my mind, I can see how somebody could say, hey, that's not fair. 3 years ago, he was the man and now he's over here with us. And I think from my perspective, I can see if I really deep down always felt like a woman and now I finally did what I need to do to be considered a woman, like leave me alone, just let me do my sport. Like I understand both sides.
Right. Yeah. And you'll see like people have analyzed it is also hard to analyze previous results because like in any sport in athletics, it's like my freshman year, I was not great, but like by my senior year, like my technique was better, my endurance was better because I trained for those 4 years. So it's like people forget that you make that progression, right? But also you'll see that like she isn't dominating the competition. She got first, fifth, and eighth, and she didn't break any world records. She was far off of the records. So it's not like she's dominating the competition, but it's easy to make that assumption because we've always assumed that, all men are more athletic and better than all women, when in reality, there's a whole variety of men and women, and kind of what their athletic abilities are. And that's the point of HRT, is to nullify that. And sure, like, you can't change someone's height, you can't change someone's lung capacity, but it's no different, it's no different than someone having, being 6'8". Like, they can't help that. Like, and it's not unfair. They're just born that way. And there's also the concept of like Caster Semenya, who was assigned female at birth, who's a runner for, oh my God,
Brazil?
this is an African, I want to say it was in South Africa, but she was a runner for, I want to say it was a Eastern African country. I'll look it up after this and kick myself because I forgot. Or maybe South, yeah, anyway, but she, she's assigned female at birth, but because of her naturally produced hormones and her levels, she wasn't allowed to compete. So there's also a little bit of racism in there, but that's a whole nother subject.
Yeah.
Because you look at how people look at Serena Williams, and they're always talking about how it's unfair and she's super masculine and super muscular, but like, that's just the way she was built, baby. Like, that's just the way she is. Like, and I think that
I honestly, I do agree with what you're saying, but I think there's an argument on both sides. And the conversation is still so young, and we're still so biased from our history,
right,
that it's just, it's gonna lead to pushback.
right.
Yeah.
No, any change is, there's no such thing as easy change, right? There's always, no change in history was just welcomed, right? And I think it goes back to inclusion. I think it goes back to, I get comments all the time of like, why don't trans women just compete against other trans women? Why don't you just make your own category? And I'm like, separate but equal doesn't work. And also, like, I know maybe 4 other trans women in the whole state of Washington that play volleyball. That's not even enough for one team. Like, what are we supposed to do? So it's like this theory of just like, why don't you, it goes back to othering people and excluding people, when it's like, we're not talking about like this whole slew of Olympic athletes that are coming that are trans. We're talking about like a 50-year-old kid who just wants to feel like they belong. Like, that's what's at stake here. Yeah. And there's this huge argument that like all these men are just going to transition just so they can win, but it's like they're underestimating like the toll that it takes on you to take HRT for 3 years, and like, not even just your body, but like socially, like you're having a transition, and now, you're different to your family, to your friends, to your loved ones, to, your spouse, to your, it kind of takes away from how hard it is to transition, and all the things that trans people have to go through just to feel accepted at home, let alone in front of, millions of people. And I think that that's kind of the thing that gets overlooked a lot. Like, people think it's really, really easy to transition, and that people are just going to do it. I guarantee you there's no, like, there isn't an athlete that wants to win that bad that's going to completely change themselves if they're not trans to transition just to win. It's really hard on your body, and it's really hard on you mentally. And so.
No, I think you're definitely right. And I do, it's like I said, it's one of those things. Change is hard. Let me ask you this. Tell us about your experience, like transitioning into women's bathroom.
Yeah, so I'm very lucky, I guess. So I transitioned in the middle of the pandemic, which was like, I mean, my dad died, the pandemic happened, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna find myself, and I'm gonna live my truth, and I'm gonna work on myself. And so the plus side of that is that when I went to the office, no one was in the office. Like, I worked in this huge kind of corporate park area, and they all were working from home. And I work in real estate, and so it's like, we could work from home, but we still were coming into the office. And so it was pretty seamless to me, and I got to get used to it. Outside of work was definitely really, really stressful. It's terrifying because you never know. I hardly ever talk when I'm in the women's restroom. I get asked a lot if I'm going to change my voice, and honestly, I probably won't ever. I've actually really always been self-conscious of my voice, because before it was too feminine, and now all of a sudden it's deep. I'm like, you know what? We're not going to touch it. We're just going to leave it. It's fine. It's all good. But it was terrifying of just like, and there was all the, remember all those, like the bathroom bills, right? And I'm like, yes. We just want to pee. Like, we just want to be able to like go to the bathroom. Like it has nothing. And there's all this like this rhetoric about like, oh, like all these pedophiles are gonna do that. I was like, then your problem is with the pedophiles. It's not with trans people. Like, let's punish the pedophiles, which by the way aren't doing this. But if that's actually the problem, then why should we punish trans people for pedophiles? They're separate things, right? And so it was really stressful. I remember that I would, and there's like apps and stuff that you could look up, like where are like unisex bathrooms, where are the genderless bathrooms, where are like the family restrooms? Because for a while that was like, I would consciously just hold it in until I got home because I was like, I don't want to have to deal with this. I don't have to fight anyone. I don't want to have to cause a scene. We like, no one wants trouble. No one likes confrontation. And so it was hard. It was also it's those small things that really make, they're kind of milestones. Like I remember the first time I was like, I'm using the women's restroom today. This is where I'm gonna do it today. Even though I know no one's in this building, but it was just like this symbolic, like.
That was your lunch counter.
What was that?
That was your lunch counter.
Exactly. I was just like, I'm here. Like I've made it. Like I'm stepping forward. I'm doing this for myself. And it's that whole process has been hard at times to like feel comfortable taking up space. And I remember my first volleyball tournament, like after I transitioned and being like, this is really, really important to me. And I know this is important for other people. I'm really, really uncomfortable. And I don't want to be here because I don't feel safe, but like, I have to do this for myself. And I know that like sports is really important to me. And I want to feel like I'm not losing that just because I transitioned. And so it was those little milestones of just like, okay, like, you don't know, no one who's trans like is like, okay, well, some of them do, but like I transition and I come out and day 2, I'm like, yep, I'm just gonna take up space and feel comfortable shopping in a women's department store. Or like I still am like, it's one of those things where because I'm so aware and I want to make sure I'm safe, I just automatically assume that everyone in the room is thinking about or dissecting me, which is not the case. Most of the time, people don't care, like, especially with masks. I was like, I'm good. Like I haven't got a mask on. But that's the reality. It's the same thing as like people of color in a room full of white people, or like you walk up to a business and it's like plastered with like American flags and you're like, I don't know if I'm safe here. But you do that to keep yourself safe. And so that was a hard part for me. And it's still a hard part for me now is relaxing in public and being able to feel safe. I'm still always on guard. And I know that not all trans people, there's this whole concept of passing, right? Of being able to pass as whatever gender I identify as. And I'm not going to deny that I don't have that privilege, that I know that, granted, if I talk, it's a different story. But I know that in general, like I can go out and I'm probably not going to get questioned. But that's not always the case for everyone. And not everyone wants that. There are some people who are going to transition and don't really care what they look like. And they're just like, I'm just going to exist, which more power to you. Like, I love that. Like, whatever you find beautiful is beautiful and don't listen to anyone else. And so it's always an adventure. It's a never-ending process.
Have you gone back to the men's bathroom?
Mm-mm. Well, there's I was at like a concert or something, and the women's line was so long. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, what are we doing in there? And my friend was like, just use the men's restroom. I was like, this is really awkward for you, but like, honestly, yeah. Like, I'm gonna go use a stall in the men's restroom. And like, there's hardly anyone in there. And I was like, okay, so there's just women at this concert. But I was like, yeah, I was like, I need to pee. At the end of the day, I just need to pee.
All right, so let's take that brief break now.
Okay.
And we'll come back and we'll talk more about spirituality and the work that you're doing for the young people and why it's important to keep doing this, because suicide is a real problem.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome.